Hello and welcome to STRT Over Coffee. My name is Shaquila Smith, Product Marketing Analyst here at STRT. STRT Over Coffee is all about having conversations with creators in the Salt Lake City area, and today we'll be interviewing Tanner Scott, who is the CEO and founder at Ranksey. Ranksey is a digital marketing agency who helps businesses with their online presence and SEO reach. In this episode, we'll be discussing marketing essentials for every startup. So, hi Tanner, how are you?
Doing great, Shay. Excited to be here. How you doing?
Excited to have you. I'm doing really good. I am excited to kind of talk about the marketing essentials for every startup. I think this will be a really good episode. So I'm really excited. Let's open it up and kind of just tell everybody listening about yourself, about a little bit about Ranksey, a tiny bit, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I'm Tanner Scott. I'm the CEO and founder of Ranksey Digital Marketing. We've been in business for about 2.5 years now. We focus primarily on web design, branding, and a couple digital marketing strategies that will, hopefully help our clients grow their online presence and ultimately increase their revenue.
Cool. What got you inspired to create your own marketing startup?
So that's kind of an interesting story. Most people just have this burning passion about something when they start a business. My burning passion was that I hated looking for a job. So straight out of college, I had a marketing degree from the University of Utah. Um, I didn't have any experience, of course. So when I was looking for a job for months and months and months, every single company out there that was hiring for marketing, even just a marketing coordinator position that should be entry level, they wanted 2+ years of experience. And so I obviously didn't have that. After a while, I did so many interviews and just could not land a job. After a while, I just, took it upon myself to start a marketing agency. And I was a little naive to think that I could just jump into it and be successful at it. But that's kind of how I got into it. And I obviously did not know what I was doing in the very beginning, but I think the best way to learn is probably just throw yourself in the fire and figure it out, which is essentially what I did. There was a lot of ups and downs, but it's made me who I am today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of starting your own anything, right? Like marketing agency or whatever, it's straight out of school is difficult, but you learn from doing in those trials. So what are some of the trials you encountered when you're creating your startup, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, so I'd say the first trial was I had to learn how to build websites because I was going to sell websites to clients. So, first website I built was for my own agency, which was just a disaster. But I'd say that the biggest thing was just, a big thing for me was sales. I back then I was not much of a people person. I didn't really put myself out there. Sales was really difficult for me, but even if I was able to land a client, I had a really hard time delivering to those clients because I did not know what I was doing. So the first handful of clients was just, putting in endless hours trying to figure it out for, very little compensation. So that's pretty much the gist of it. Also, while I was growing my agency, I had a full-time job in the construction industry. That was very demanding. So I was working 50 hours a week at my full-time job, and I'd come home and work on Ranksey at night. So that was another trial that I went through.
How did you set your prices initially when you were starting? How did you, because that is difficult, right? Because you're learning, and then you're like, hey, but you have to pay for my work. So how do you balance that out?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I would just do it for really cheap. That was my strategy. Like, hey, I'm cheaper than anyone else you'll find, and that actually worked pretty well. But in the beginning, I was thinking, okay, well, let's try to calculate how many hours I'm going to spend on this project. I even Googled how much should a website cost. Really, it was just a lot of trial and error until I really got the experience needed to understand how much actually goes into something and the value that's being provided.
Yeah, and I think um a lot of that is more than just the marketing aspect. It's figuring out the entrepreneurial things too. Being a
Oh yeah.
marketing entrepreneur is a little bit different. So you're like, oh, I have to figure all this out too, pricing and things like that. But how did you gain your clients, and what kind of channels did you use to get those clients initially?
So initially, I like most entrepreneurs do, you set up your social media accounts, you start posting, you announce to your friends and family. That's how I got my initial set of clients. After that, after my personal network had dried up, I started running marketing campaigns for myself. So I was running campaigns on Google, Facebook. So that's kind of how I got the ball rolling. But, aside from that, it was just kind of networking and talking to people and just really putting myself out there and having good, meaningful conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one is like building your clientele and figuring out ways to do it, and networking is one of them. But like how do you think marketing strategy and customer loyalty go hand in hand? Because like I think the biggest thing, especially for any company, is like relationship building. How have you figured that out and navigated through that?
So, with a marketing agency, it's a little bit different. No one's really loyal to a marketing brand, right? It's hard to
Pricing.
really establish that loyalty.
Yeah.
Now I can say that the customers that I have worked with are very loyal to Ranksey just because we do a really good job. I mean, we bend over backwards. Customer satisfaction is, our top priority. And so through that, we have been able to establish some loyalty. They'll just keep coming back and back again. But, as far as like building loyalty on social media or really any other channel, it's insanely difficult.
Yeah, no, I totally think that. What are other ways that, because it's kind of ironic being a marketing agency and marketing to other people, and then like being like, oh, I'm gonna help you market for other people. What are some ways that you've marketed your marketing agency?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the cobbler's kid, right? They don't ever have shoes. It's the same way with marketing agencies, and that's because, if someone hires me to help them market their product or service, like instantly I just have all these ideas that come to mind, but marketing a marketing agency is actually a lot harder than it sounds. And a big reason for that is just because of how saturated it is. Anyone that knows anything about digital marketing is suddenly a freelancer and has their own gig. And so, there's a lot of marketers out there that don't really know what they're doing. And so that makes it even harder. But I would say the best ways that I've been able to market Ranksey is, search engine marketing. We do a lot of SEO on our own site. We get a lot of local leads. We do a lot of pay-per-click ads on Google. We're able to drive some revenue that way. And we've also paid for premium listing space on online directories. That's had a huge return on investment. And we've also done a lot of Facebook stuff too, but that tends to be a little difficult for B2B brands.
Okay. So you also have a podcast, and how new is that podcast? Who do you have on your podcast, and has that really helped your marketing, or is it kind of just indirect? It's not something that you're trying to focus on, or you're just trying to have conversations?
So, in the beginning, I launched the podcast it was third week of September. In the beginning, it was really just to meet more people, try to build some authority, and ultimately try to get more business, right? So we've had a few local names on the show that you may recognize. Victor Gill, CEO, co-founder of START. Earl Foote, he's the CEO of Nexus IT Consultants. And in a couple weeks, you're going to see Scott and Natalie Paul. Scott Paul's the CEO of Wooly. He's going to be on the show in a couple weeks. But even just, I think we're 10 episodes in, even just in that 10-week time frame, I've already seen a huge difference from it. And aside from customer acquisition, having a podcast is actually insanely helpful for SEO. You'll get a ton of links that way. You're going to get a ton of content getting out. Google loves that. So there's a lot of other benefits to launching a podcast other than just, building relationships and getting more clients.
Yeah, I like podcasts just because they're so fun to listen to. And yeah, I think that goes on with like the content creation. I think that's good too. So how do you build engagement with content beyond like, your own marketing, but marketing for other businesses as well?
So when it comes to content, I mean, It's tough, right? Most content out there sucks. Most content out there does not get any engagement. What I found to be the best approach is just providing value. If you have a target market, you know they have problems that you're trying to solve. You should be creating content that solves those problems. And if you take a value first approach and you're constantly helping them first, I mean, it's going to come right back around tenfold. I don't have any specific examples for you because we don't do a ton of content creation, but that's the approach that I would take.
Yeah. What do you think's better because it's so saturated digital marketing? And I mean, I think that's why content struggles with like getting engagement interaction, right? It's like the quality, but also like what do you post, like the caption? There's a lot that goes with it. What is it better to focus on digital marketing or guerrilla marketing? What are your thoughts on that? Because I think the flyers and things like that have gone kind of away more so than ever. But what are your thoughts on that? Why digital marketing?
So, I mean, digital marketing is great because you can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. But of course, it costs a lot of money to market online. So that's where I think guerrilla marketing could be a good alternative, if you don't have a big budget. But I also think that guerrilla marketing is really hard to pull off. You have to get really creative, and some of the really smart and creative strategies of guerrilla marketing could probably still cost you a lot of money. But I think you're also limited into what you can do with it. I mean, if you're going to do a guerrilla marketing campaign in all 50 states, I mean, that's not really easy to pull off, right? I also think that it depends on who you're targeting. So I think if you're a consumer facing brand, then guerrilla marketing might be worthwhile. But in the end, I think it just comes down to the budget. I think that either way is good. And I think it's ultimately up to the founder to decide what's best for their business.
No, I think that's a good point. I think guerrilla marketing is super fun and creative, and I think guerrilla marketing could also, incorporate a little bit of digital marketing as well. Like, there could be a mix there. So I had a question regarding advice on like creating digital marketing content and ads. Like, how do you know which content is ad worthy to actually spend money on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn to promote it?
So I think most of the time it comes down to what your goal is. You got to be able to identify where you're at right now and where you're going to.
Yeah.
Um, Most of the time, I don't really see a lot of ads going straight to content, but on Facebook, that's actually a really effective strategy because if for any reason you're targeting just a select group of people, and Facebook has their own parameters and targeting that you have to use, you're not always going to reach the right audience that way. So a good way to reach that audience would be to run ads to a blog post or something, and that at least you're showing it to a broad audience, but people that click on it and engage with it are actually interested in what you're writing about. So that way you can build up a warmed audience, and then you can retarget them on Facebook too. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you can go about it, but in my experience, paid advertising is more like sales funnels, right? And not necessarily content.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think some of the stuff we're talking about is once you're in the midst of like figuring out and digging marketing strategies. But what advice would you give to startups on marketing that have zero experience on marketing? So, say that there's someone like you that just knows engineering, they're very tech savvy, and they just didn't know how to start marketing. What advice would you give them?
So, I mean, the best advice I can give is get a website up. I mean, even if you don't have a lot of money to spend on someone to professionally design it, go to Wix, create it yourself. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that your messaging is clear. Make sure that you actually tell your user how to take action and how to, get started. So that's really critical. Obviously, it needs to look decent, but um, so aside from the website, I mean, I think the best advice I could give anyone with no marketing experience is just start producing content. Um, content is something that's just so often overlooked. I mean, it can be so powerful for your business. And if you're not creating content, then you might as well not have a website. You might as well not even be focusing on digital marketing. But the cool thing about content is, even if you don't have the money to invest in SEO or paid ads or driving traffic to your website, even if you're just producing content, most of the time you'll still get some traffic from that. And then if you ever do decide to focus on SEO in the future, then you're going to see a huge boost. And I like podcasts because they're evergreen content, right? I mean, podcast episode stays around forever, and um, that I just think that's probably the best strategy nowadays. At least the year's 2020, COVID, pandemic. Podcasting seems to be the way to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think too, it just goes back to, I don't know, the relationship building is just so important. Do you have any advice on building relationships through digital marketing? That's a difficult task, but do you have any advice there? Is it just like a call to action on every post? Is it just like a link to get a hold of somebody? Like, what is your advice there?
So I honestly don't know if there's a way to build community or build relationships with digital marketing other than just, trying to bring them in under your wing and get them to start receiving your messaging. But I think the best way to build community is like exactly what you guys are doing in the start. I mean, put on events, do some webinars, create a Facebook group or a Slack group, and just connect with these people. I mean, I think that's the best way you can do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it takes a lot of time to build relationships, and it's also very difficult with COVID.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm sure, and that's nice that you said that about START and the community building. That's a huge compliment. So thank you.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of marketing it almost makes you feel like, how would I say it? It just sometimes could dehumanize you if it's not doesn't have the right statement. YouTube does this really sad, like I hate to say it, but poorly, right? Like you click on a video and then like someone just like pops up on the screen for 5 seconds. You could skip the ad if you want, but they're like selling you something usually. And it just sounds so inauthentic. But I think podcasts, I think are is always a good organic way to see like who a person really is, and it gives you a feel of like what the company is all about and the culture. But I'm curious on your thoughts on the essentials of marketing, and do you have like a step-by-step process? And what is the best way to go about marketing when you're just starting out, and you're trying to build a clientele?
So I mean, I don't have a step-by-step process just because every business and industry is so different. But I would say the most important thing you should do in the very beginning, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, is build your brand. Um, and a lot of people will probably say, "Well, I don't know how to design. I'm not a graphic designer." Well, download Adobe Illustrator and figure it out. I mean, that's what I did. You're an entrepreneur. You got to wear a lot of hats. You just have to figure it out. So I think that's probably the most important thing you can do. And then, like I said, get a website up, start talking to people, start networking. I was very late to the game when it came to networking. And then the pandemic hit, so I had to kind of figure out some other ways to go about it. So I think podcasting has probably been the best thing I've ever done for my business.
Oh, that's actually really good to know. With that, I had a question, individual marketing versus startup marketing, because I think what you do really well is individual marketing, and that's maybe why you're getting so much traction on your podcast. Like you're really good at marketing yourself as an individual, and then Ranksey second, which is good because I think there's a face to the company and that people are like, oh, okay, I trust Tanner. And I love his podcast, Ranksey. I'll check into it. So what are your thoughts on individual marketing and how you've experienced that on LinkedIn, or what kind of platforms do you think is the best for individual marketing?
So I'm big on individual marketing, especially as an agency owner. I think someone has to be the face of the company, right? I think it reminds everyone that you're talking to that you're an actual person, not just a corporation, right? So I think it just gives you that personalization and really helps you build authority and like it helps people trust you, right? As far as platforms, I mean, LinkedIn is probably the best one, but I've also seen people be really successful on Facebook as well. Um, you just have to be willing to, just post about business on your Facebook
Yeah.
profile, though, which isn't always the right fit for most people. But I've enjoyed LinkedIn. That's how I find almost all of my podcast guests. I've been able to build some really great connections on there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree. I think LinkedIn's like a really good platform to meet people and to talk about business.
Right. And
Yeah.
as long as you're being authentic and not
Mhm.
just trying to shove your services down people's throats, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. Like, I have a really good follow-up question to that too. Is like, how do you make sure that when you reach out to people about your services and things like that, that you're not spammy? Like, how do you draw that line of marketing where it's like, okay, sales and marketing, I think, go hand in hand a lot of the time. And so, like, when you're trying to sell someone, not sell, but like get to know somebody, how do you go about that?
So that's something that I've always struggled with, actually.
It's hard.
Yeah, and I'm not the best at sales. Like if someone approaches me and like my sales light turns on somehow, but when it comes to outbound, me going out and talking to someone about it, um, that's really hard to do on LinkedIn. And so, you got to kind of think outside the box and you got to think, okay, well, how can I add some value to this person instead of just asking? You got to treat relationships like a bank. You got to keep making deposits and then eventually you'll be able to make a withdrawal. So I've found that having my podcast has actually been a great way to get my foot in the door and get talking to some of these people. Um, but it may be different for other businesses. For my industry, I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast has been bombarded with emails and LinkedIn messages about their website or their SEO. I mean, it's all over the place, so it's really hard to stand out. So it's ultimately up to building those relationships that really makes a difference.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And there's a lot of competition in the market, whether, I mean, you're in the digital marketing agency or whatever. There's just a lot of everything now, I think, because it's honestly, um, what would I say? Like, to start a business takes a certain person, but then just the access we have now, makes it so much easier to start a business. And you just see so many small businesses on social media and things like that. So do you think advertising on social media works? Is there other avenues that people don't consider when they're starting, a startup that's a good marketing strategy as well?
Yeah, so majority of the time when I see someone starting a new business, someone I went to high school with, someone I met in college, the first thing they always do is just go to social media, and I think that's a good start, but that doesn't really, I mean, that doesn't really get you anywhere. It can, if you're selling something that people really um, like, I don't know, I've seen home decor businesses get a lot of reach on Facebook, but if you're someone like me selling marketing, you're not going to reach a lot of people on Facebook. But organically, it's kind of a shot in the dark. If you're really good at what you're posting, you keep people engaged, then I think that's a good strategy. But you could also try advertising on Facebook and driving some revenue that way. But the biggest mistake I see is that these small businesses don't even have a website, so they can't explore other channels.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think along with that is like, if you don't have a website that's consistent with your brand, then it's hard and difficult for people to find you on social media and things like that. If you have a totally different name for your social media handle than like your actual company, then it also becomes really hard. And it sucks too, because I think people nowadays, like, they know how valuable website URL is, and they'll buy it even if they're not going to utilize it, because they could sell it,
Yeah.
for a really high price. But yeah, I totally agree with that. What are some things that you've built or done and organized on the back end that's really helped you with the consistency of your brand on your website, on your social media channels? Like, what have you done that's really essential?
So this is something that a lot of people don't think about. First thing I did when I started Ranksey was I put together a brand style guide. Everything that I touch comes from that. I never use a color outside of my color palette. The logo is always the same. Everything about it should be the same. I mean, you're basically giving your company a personality when you brand it. And so that needs to be consistent across everything. And I see that a lot too. A lot of websites out there, especially websites created by the founder themselves, um, just random colors everywhere. The logo is one thing and the rest of the website doesn't match it, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
How do you pick your colors? How did you pick your company colors?
Yep, that's a great question. So initially, I've rebranded a couple times, but initially it was just, there's like tools online, that'll put palettes together for you. So I kind of custom crafted my own palette just based on colors that I liked. Not really thinking about how that was really going to play into like UI and how that's going to look on the website, right? So about a year into it, I was like, you know what? I actually really hate these colors. And I was scrolling through Instagram one day, and I follow these pages that just post color palettes every day. So I saw one that I was just in love with. I was like, all right, I'm changing my colors to that. So that was kind of how that went. I know a lot of companies will probably put a lot of strategy behind the colors they pick and stuff, but I don't think that that's really that important for marketing agencies.
Yeah. And I think that like really just depends on your industry, like you were saying, like what you're doing. How did you pick your logo then? Is there like a backstory? Is there like a story behind that?
I wish that there was, but in reality, I just went to Fiverr and hired someone, and I picked a design out of the three they gave me, and then like I said, I've rebranded a couple times. So really, the logo itself wasn't really that important to me. What was important to me was the name of the company. So it's called Ranksey because of SEO rankings. It's just a play on the word rank.
See, so you do have a story.
There's
Not
a little bit of
necessarily the
strategy there.
logo, but the name.
Yeah, the name.
So how do you think your company name and things like that plays into marketing? Because I mean, you would have to sit in a room and talk to you about that. Like no one would, I mean, maybe someone would guess, but they wouldn't know. Um, how important do you think that is when starting out?
I think it's important. In the very beginning, having an agency called Ranksey was a little bit weird. A lot of the prospects I talked to just could not wrap their head around it. But I think part of that was just because of how bad my branding was at first. But nowadays, it seems like it actually gives me an edge. Like if I'm trying to close an SEO deal, they see that my company name is called Ranksey, and we're talking about rankings all the time. I think they can connect the dots, and I think that has somewhat of an influence on it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think also like story and your reason why of starting anything is just really essential in a startup of any sort. Um, so I totally think that even if someone doesn't get it and they sit and talk to you about it or whatever, and they say, don't get it, whatever, but at least you have a story and you have a why. Um, I have a question regarding kind of the cost structure of marketing. So if there's one founder, I think it depends on how many founders you have, how much capital you have, and things like that, obviously, to distribute to your marketing. But when you're starting out with zero capital, you're the first founder, what would you what advice would you give to a startup on like how much to spend on your marketing, and what's too much, how to go about it? I know you mentioned you did Fiverr at one point for your logo. So like, what do you think's a good resources to use when you don't really have that much capital to spend on it, on your marketing?
So I start my clients off the same way I would start anyone off, and it's always start off small, prove out the concept, make sure there's a return on the investment, and then scale it up from there. Usually, the starting point for any campaign is around $500 per month. So that would give anyone listening an idea of where that starts. Now, if you have zero capital, obviously that's not going to work. So, I think just in the beginning, you just got to hustle, you got to grind, you just got to, make something out of nothing. And then once you're ready to actually scale is when you should be investing in marketing. Because I think during that time, there's still a lot that you don't know about yourself and your product or your service. And throwing a bunch of money at marketing is just going to make those problems worse. So that would be my advice. Focus on your business, focus on dialing in everything about your target customer. And then once you feel like you have processes and systems in place that could handle an influx of new business, that's when you should invest in it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that advice. It's funny you mentioned just like you're trying to figure yourself out too during like building a company, because it is totally that. Like you see it almost like as a company evolves, you see that there's people behind it that probably evolved too. Like it's kind of a funny thing. Like a business is a reflection almost of what's internally happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are some advice that like you have as far as like producing content as your brand is evolving? Like, do you think that reposting other people's content is good because you see that sometimes on social media? Or do you think producing your own original work from the beginning, even if it's evolving, is good? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So a lot of that kind of sounds like it's on the social media side, which is not something that I'm an expert in, so I won't comment on that. But I think original syndicated content is always the way to go. Um, Now, if you're worried about producing content that no one's going to see, you could produce content for other businesses, and you'll get a link in exchange, which could drive some referral traffic. But um, ultimately, it'll just give you a boost on Google.
Yeah. So on Google, what do you think helps with organic traffic then and the content you produce there on your website and things like that?
So here's the thing. If you want to rank number one on Google, you have to have the best content for that keyword on Google, right? So it's a lot of people think that SEO is just tricking Google into ranking your website higher, but that's just so incorrect. If you want to rank at the top, people have to prefer your content over anyone else's. So it all comes down to the content. Content is king. You have to invest a ton of time and energy into creating that content. And of course, there's a lot of other things involved with SEO as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, content is the most important thing that you should be focusing on in digital marketing.
That's so good to know. What are some myths that people come to you thinking? What are some common myths?
Okay, I have a few of them. One of them is I get calls from people saying, hey, we want to just do SEO one time. Well, that doesn't work. You might as well just not do it at all. It's something you have to do consistently. And same with content. You have to produce content consistently. That's the only way you're going to get anywhere. Let's see. Another one is some people think that you can just throw a keyword on your page 1,000 times and that's how you rank at the top. But actually, you only need to put it in there like 3 times, and then you're maxed out on how far you can get. What's interesting is, see, having your keyword on your page in the right places only impacts your rankings by like 5%. It's all mostly off page.
That's crazy. I think, and do you think that people, is it because of YouTube videos? Is it because of like so much information on the internet that people are just gathering from like how-tos and things like that, that they're getting these myths, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think the biggest reason for that is
Yeah.
SEO has evolved so much over the
Yeah.
years. Like back before I think it was the Panda update or the Penguin update to the algorithm back in like 2012. I mean, you could just create these link farms of, I mean, just spammy links, just thousands and thousands of links going to your website, and Google couldn't decipher between a valid link and a spammy link. So that's how people were ranking at the top. Um, so when the Penguin update came out, everyone that was doing that just got either delisted or they just lost all their rankings entirely. So I think that's the source of all these myths. And another thing is SEO is a very complicated subject. A lot of people don't understand it. So I think that's another reason. But yeah, there's been an evolution in SEO. For
Yeah.
many, many years, people were just trying to manipulate Google, but that does not work anymore. Google is much, much smarter. And so, Google Google's only way of knowing if your content is relevant and authoritative is by having other relevant and authoritative websites in your niche linking to it.
Yeah, I think that Google and social media platforms have gotten so much better at indicating what's spam, what's real, what's fake, bots, like, and it's honestly from what I think, this is personally what I think, and maybe I'll let you speak on it, but I think there's such a waste of time and money, like and energy, like people purchasing bots and things like that. It's just, I mean, it's just a waste of time. Not only will you get flagged, but also, I mean, and then it just looks bad for your brand.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely a waste. I mean, algorithms are getting smarter and smarter, and the reason for that is because they want to keep their users using their service or their platform. When if you type in something on Google and you land on this spammy website that doesn't load for 10 seconds, I mean, why would you use Google again, right? So that's the driving force behind it is these platforms are just trying to give their users a great experience. And so that's why they've had to crack down on it. And just like you said, it's made it a much better experience for everyone.
So I was wondering, how do you stay on top of, how Google is evolving and changing and how it works and the algorithms and the SEO? Like, how do you keep up with that information? Because I imagine that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, that's true. Google's constantly changing their updates to their algorithm, but they're very vocal about it. So they have a webmaster blog that I am subscribed to. So anytime they issue an update, I get an email. But I also read a ton of blogs about SEO, so I can keep up with the latest trends and everything like that. And that's really, really essential to being successful at anything digital marketing just because everything is changing every single day. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. You'll see creatives and things like that on social media, on Instagram, be like, "Oh, did the algorithm change on Instagram? Why is my engagement so low?" Like, and they'll post it and like let everyone know that their like content is not getting as much likes or as many comments because they didn't keep up with the algorithm and something changed. And it really does. It impacts you if you don't keep up with it, if you don't read about it, if you don't understand it, if you don't be an expert on what's new. I think it's easy to, especially nowadays with everything changing and technology, just how easy 1 year, if you don't even keep up with it, how easy you could be set back from getting any business.
Yeah, could you imagine if you took a complete break from all technology and then you went back to the same platforms you were using before and how different they are? I
Yeah.
mean, it's pretty insane. I mean, it's nice that Google shares the updates about it. I mean, they're very vague about what they mention, but at least they like keep everyone updated about it. I don't think any social media platform does that.
Yeah, I don't think so too. I I honestly, I know Instagram keeps quiet about it. Like they'll tell you what they updated, obviously, but I don't think their algorithms like out in the open unless there is some secret I don't know about, but I
Oh
haven't
no.
heard of it.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing with SEO too. No one besides Google knows what the algorithm looks for and what everything is weighted at. But through testing different variables and trial and error, I mean, it's pretty easy to determine what's driving rankings and what's hurting them. And same with social media. Um, LinkedIn specifically, I mean, all you have to really do is look at what other posts are performing well and then just kind of learn from them and incorporate those strategies and tactics into your own posts.
I think that's really good advice. Do you have any books that you read that has really helped you with marketing strategy? I think that LinkedIn posts, like you said, and just listening to what other people are saying to you is a really good way. But are there any books, or I know that you mentioned some blogs, but are there any books that you've read that have really helped you?
So I'm one of those people that buys a ton of books and has this long list of books that I'd like to read, but I never read them. So
Yeah, I'm very similar. I'm very slow at going through them. Yeah.
yeah, me too. I mean, occasionally I'll pick one up and I'm like, all right, this is gold. I finish it real quick, and then it's probably a couple months before I read another one. But I will say there are a couple that I've read recently that are really, really, really helpful when it comes to marketing. Um, Anything Seth Godin has written is really good for marketing, but also Donald Miller. He's got a book called Building a Story Brand. That's a really helpful book for anyone that's looking to learn anything about marketing. And he also recently released another one called Marketing Made Simple. Those are both worth checking out for sure.
Awesome. That's great. Well, is there any advice that like that you are dying to tell people listening about marketing as a startup before we end?
Um, the only thing I can really think of is, just test everything. You have to test everything, test every single channel. You have to figure out what's going to work for your business, and you can't give up too soon either. More often than not, when you launch a new campaign on a new channel, it's going to flop. That's because you have to figure out why it's not working and you have to dial it in. The majority of the time, it's coming down to your messaging, what you're saying in your ads. That makes a huge difference. So that's why testing is so important. Test all these different headlines, descriptions, images, um, so you can optimize it and get the most out of it.
Awesome. I totally agree with that. Testing is a huge, like just go full speed, test, fail, get back up. I totally agree with that. Isn't that like, I think that's just like an entrepreneur mantra too. It's like, just keep going, fail, and
Oh
get
yeah,
back up.
yeah. Just keep going. Don't give up. I mean, that's. I feel like that's pretty given for entrepreneurs, but for anyone that's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, like it's not easy. It's difficult, but you just push yourself through it, and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. Awesome. Well, thanks, Tanner, for being on here at Start Over Coffee. It's been so wonderful having you. And I, even myself, took in some really good advice. So thank you for providing so much value.
No problem, Shay. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If you would like to learn more about Ranksey, visit ranksey.com. To learn more about START, visit strt.com.